Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Robbie Rhino, and in today's video I'm going to be reviewing the Lioness Škoda T45, which is a Czechoslovakian Tier 7 premium heavy tank, and it is the tank that you get if you purchase the Ultimate Season Pass for the Steel Beast season, and that's the only way that you can get your hands on this tank. So yeah, if you want this tank you're going to have to purchase the Ultimate Season Pass. I'm sure it'll be available in the future, but should you like the look of it, I think the Season Passes are pretty good value anyway. And yeah, it's a pretty solid Tier 7 heavy tank with two different gun packages on this 88mm gun. You have a single fire gun and a 3-shot autoloader. I think it looks pretty cool with its little lion there on the side of the turret. We're going to start off by talking about the armor here on Tanks GG, and then I have 4 gameplays for you where I will talk over the statistics of the tank, show you my equipment and commander setup. The first 2 gameplays are the single fire gun, and the second 2 gameplays are with the 3-shot autoloader, and I'll give you an indication of how it performs and which gun I prefer. So let's get stuck into the armor then. So it has 7 degrees of gun depression, and this is using its full extent of its 7 degrees of gun depression there, so it does struggle on quite a lot of ridge lines, but if you look hard enough you'll find some nice ridge lines to go hold down on and make it work for you. It's got pretty decent armor against equal and lower tiered tanks, however it does struggle to bounce shells from tiers 8 and 9 tanks. You can do it if you sort of angle it 45 or over angle like this past 45 degrees. You can get some pretty cool ricochets off the upper hull. It's a really good side scraper, especially against sort of tier 6s and 7s, and if you don't expose this front bit here you can side scrape against higher tiers as well, because it has 80mm of side armor, which is really nice. As you can see here, imagine this was a corner just here and you're side scraping, that's all an auto ricochet angle, and you can sort of angle up and over angle to a fairly sort of extreme angling point for a side scrape, and it's still an auto ricochet angle off the rear of the tank. However, you do have to bear in mind there is this part of the upper hull here that does jut out, and it's only going to be about 190 or 191mm of effective armor depending on what angle you have the tank at. So dead on, if it's looking at you using its 7 degrees of gun depression, the lower plate is going to be about 126mm of effective armor. You're going to be battered by pretty much everything, even tier 6s. However, the upper plate will be pretty useful to you, so it's about 200mm of effective armor, and if you angle it at 45 degrees sort of angle roughly like this, it goes up to just sort of shy of 220mm of effective armor. And if you over angle you can get some pretty cool ricochets here. Bear in mind you're exposing the lower plate, and this is more for when you're moving and they miss their shot or something like that, but it can be useful, and I've bounced some shots off some tiers 8s and some 9s, and it's pretty cool when you do that. So the turret, when you're on a ridgeline and it's looking dead in front of you, it's about 213 to 225mm at the top of the turret. However, you do have this slope back part of the bottom of the turret here, which is a weak point unfortunately, and if it's on a ridgeline looking down at you, shoot to the left and right the bottom of the turret here, and it's about 183mm of effective armor. And if it isn't using its gun depression, you can see that the armor isn't as effective at all. The upper plate is going to be sort of 175mm of effective armor, the lower plate 135, and the turret is going to be just shy of 200mm of effective armor. So it's almost better sometimes to have your turret like this rather than like this if people do know about those weak points, and unfortunately it has a cupola, which means that's a gigantic weak spot for you, and it's not too hard to hit. It's only 45mm of armor, and it's slightly rounded, meaning the effective armor angling goes up to about 74 to 76mm of effective armor. Do bear in mind as well with the gun depression, you have 7 degrees all around here. However, here when the gun is looking behind the tank is only 2.5 degrees of gun depression, so if you're running away from people, they're down here, you know, a small light tank, you're going to struggle, so you're going to have to turn sideways and get a shot on them that way. So that's enough talking about the armour there. I think it's pretty usable armour. It's quite a sort of solid tier 7 heavy tank. It hasn't got outstanding armour or something like an outstanding turret like the T29, but it will save you taking a few shots nearly every game, and yeah, it's always nice when a heavy tank can bounce at least 1 or 2 rounds, keeping you in the game for longer. So we're gonna head on now into the gameplays, and I'll talk about the single fire gun first. So we're now on Vineyards here in the first gameplay of today's video, and we're using the single fire gun package in this replay. But first we'll talk about the bonuses and then the statistics of the Škoda T45, and then we'll get talking about how I like to play this tank and which gun I prefer. So you earn 20% more XP per battle and 35% more silver, which is always nice. And now we'll get talking about the statistics. So hit points wise, you have 1400, which is very nice for a tier 7 heavy tank. Unfortunately, you only have 370 meters view range, which can be annoying on maps like this where you would want to spot out people crossing at the start of the battle, that kind of thing. Unfortunately, it's a heavy tank though, and you have to have trade-offs for the sort of armor performance and the gun performance and all that kind of good stuff. So unfortunately, it's a little bit of a downside. You can improve that with a good commander, and if you use coated optics, or advanced optics as it's now called. However, I don't use that, and I'll be telling you why in just a little bit. Mobility wise, it isn't great news, I'm afraid. It does feel extremely sluggish. You have a 660 horsepower engine with a 14.05 power to weight ratio. You only go 35 kilometers an hour forwards and 14 kilometers an hour backwards, and the traverse speeds are pretty terrible at 25 degrees a second on your hull and 26 degrees a second on your turret, and it feels extremely sluggish. And it took me a good few games to find out what sort of equipment and commander setup I was going to use with this tank, and I've gone basically for a mobility build to help me get into position just that little bit quicker, and I'll talk you through exactly what that is in just a bit. But we'll get talking about the gun now, and it's an 88mm gun, and like I said, it has 2 different gun packages. You have a single fire option and a 3-shot autoloader. In terms of the penetration and alpha damage on both of the gun packages, they are both the same. You have 220 alpha damage on your standard and premium rounds, and 270 alpha damage on your HE rounds. The penetration is pretty decent for standard AP rounds at 194mm, and your heat pen as your premium option is 250mm, which is very nice, and that will help you when you come up against the super heavies at tier 9. Unfortunately, the penetration is low as usual for HE rounds at 44mm for 270 alpha damage, so I probably wouldn't recommend carrying more than 2 or 3 of them when you come up against artillery, that kind of thing, and just carry a plethora of AP and heat rounds. The really bad downside to this gun, in my opinion, is the shell velocity. It's really slow. On the AP, it isn't too bad at 995 meters a second, but if you need to use that heat, you are going to be struggling to hit tanks at longer distances. It's only 600 meters a second, and it does feel incredibly slow. Sometimes I've fired a shell and I've wondered if I've missed, and then it just pops up that I've actually hit. It's that kind of slow. It did shock me. I didn't really look at the statistics of the shell velocity before I started to play this tank, and it did take me by surprise. And you only have 600 meters a second on your HE rounds as well, so if you're going to be firing heat or HE at long or mid to long distances, you are going to struggle to lead your targets. But the AP just about does the trick at 995 meters a second. So in terms of the single fire gun, then you have 8.11 rounds a minute with a DPM of 1784.2, which isn't too bad. It's not the quickest, but it's by no means the absolute worst at tier 7. It's a base reload of 7.4 seconds, a base aim time of 2.5 seconds, and a 0.38 accuracy. That accuracy is a little bit horrific. You can get that down to a respectable level, but the gun handling can be a little bit annoying on this tank sometimes, so you just have to decide what kind of setup you want to do with your commander and equipment, and I'll talk you through the various options in just a little bit. Like I talked about in the start of today's video with the look at the armour, you have 7 degrees of gun depression, which is a little bit annoying on quite a few of the taller ridges. For the most part, when you're brawling on flat terrain, it's absolutely fine. You have 15 degrees of gun elevation, which isn't fantastic, but it hasn't really caught me out just yet. And to top it off, with the gun on the single fire, you have 64 rounds of ammunition. So that brings to an end the first game there with a single fire gun on Vineyards. We finish in the MVP slot with just shy of 3k damage, 428 assistance. We blocked one shot with 240 damage, get 3 kills, and make a 70,000 silver profit. So we're going to head on now into the second replay with the single fire gun. Here we are on Himmelsdorf, and it's a much better fitting environment for a heavy tank, so we're going to head on down to the middle of the map at the start. It's a smaller map, so we can boost our combat Russians, get some view range out as we head into position, get a nice shot here on the move into the T-34 with massive bloom on the reticle. That was a very lucky shot there. And now we're going to go to Banana Road and try and side scrape out and do a little bit of brawling in typical heavy tank fashion. So I'll talk you through the differences between the single fire and the free shot autoloader now. In terms of the alpha damage, penetration, the ammunition and the shell velocity, that is all the same. However, the free shot autoloader does have worse DPM at 1610.4 compared to the single fire's 1784.2. It also has a worse aim time by 0.2 at 2.7 seconds. It has a worse accuracy as well at 0.4 accuracy compared to 0.38 on the single fire gun, and the rest is the same: the gun depression, elevation, and the 64 rounds of ammunition. So to get that autoloader, you sacrifice DPM, aim time, and accuracy. And just to let you know, the inter-clip reload on the free shot autoloader is 2.5 seconds, which is relatively long, and it can feel like an age sometimes, and it feels like you're exposing yourself for a little bit too long, but we'll talk about that in the last two gameplays in today's video. In terms of my equipment and commander then, I run on my equipment improved ventilation, traction system, and advanced powertrain. I've gone for the complete mobility setup, and it's a bit weird for a heavy tank, but it was just so sluggish, and the traverses got me in a lot of trouble when I was trying to angle up to ricochet shells. I wanted to get into position fast enough to get some damage off, and I was finding that sometimes the games were even over before I got there, especially with slightly faster paced games at tier 7. So I've gone for that traction system and advanced powertrain. And ventilation, I just wanted to improve everything, including my DPM, by 5%. You could choose optics if you wanted to do a little bit more spotting for yourself, or something like a gun lane drive, because the gun can be a little bit derpy, but I found this works really well. And yeah, I've tried a few different combinations, and this seems to be the one for me. And in terms of my commander, I run Sixth Sense, Born Leader, Rapid Loading, Steady Aim, Rapid Aim, Snapshot, Run and Gun, Situational Awareness, and Track Mechanic. I run the Rapid Loading to improve the DPM, some gun handling skills to get that pretty horrific accuracy and aim time down. I run situational awareness just to get a little bit of view range to mean that I'm not completely sort of blind on the battlefield. And track mechanic, I'm a heavy tank, I want to get my tracks up, especially if I'm going to be putting myself into scenarios where I'm going to be brawling. So with that commander and equipment setup, I now have a 440 meters view range. In terms of my mobility, I now go 40.42 kilometers an hour forwards, 16.17 kilometers an hour backwards, and my traverse speeds have improved to no end really. It's 27.5 degrees a second on my hold traverse and 31.67 degrees a second on my turret traverse, and it's so much more mobile and flexible on the battlefield. In terms of my DPM then, I now have a DPM of 2195.6 on my single fire gun package and a DPM of 1892 on the autoloader. In terms of the gun statistics, then I now have a 2.26 aim time on my single fire and a 2.44 second aim time on my autoloader, a 0.3 accuracy on the single fire and a 0.32 accuracy on the autoloader, and the autoloader now reloads in 15.93 seconds for me. So that's all of the information about the Škoda T45, and you've seen there how well it can perform when it's given a good map and a good matchup. There we managed to get a high caliber finish in MVP with 3 kills, 3.5k direct damage. My controller now disconnects, but we end with 172 assistance there, I believe. And yeah, a pretty good game, blocking 1695 damage and still making a profit, even though we fired a little bit of heat in that game. So now we're going to head on into the last 2 gameplays, which are with the 3-shot autoloader. So here we are on Armour, and we're using the 3-shot autoloader in this gameplay. So the autoloader can be more useful in a few different scenarios, and the main ones that come off the top of my head are when you are wanting to trade 1 for 1, or 1 clip for 1 shot, I should say. If you know you're going to eat a shot, you're going to try and bounce a shot from an enemy. If you know that they have a longish reload, you can get 2 to 3 shells into them for every one they put into you. It's also good for ambushing a tank that you know that you can take out with your clip potential of 660 alpha damage. I just was checking my maths in my head there as I was saying it. It shouldn't be that hard, but there we go. Which that can be very useful when you're trying to take out tanks that you know you couldn't take out with a single shot with the single fire gun package. Having said that, you do sacrifice that gun handling, and you also sacrifice that DPM, and at first I preferred the autoloader purely because I was having really quick games getting YOLO'd, and it meant that I could dish out a little bit of damage. But as I played this tank more, I think I was just having a bad session. I had some really good sessions in this tank, and I much prefer the tank with the single shot. I know that the reload isn't too long at just under 16 seconds with the autoloader. However, waiting sort of about 6 seconds, I think it's 6.01 seconds is my reload with the single fire now, and it just feels so much better than the autoloader. But with the autoloader you can do things like this to this 3001p who is crossing an open field, and we get 3 shots into him and he's down, where we deal 607 damage at the start of the battle. And that's how I try and play this tank. I know I might have taken a shell there, but I've taken out a tank, and that's the way that you win games. Overall, the single fire might suit players that are more comfortable getting into riskier situations, being slightly more aggressive, because you don't have to wait for that long reload. If you're fairly new to the game, or you feel like you're more of a passive sort of support player, I think the autoloader will suit you better. And if you play that way, I would reconsider that mobility setup that I've got with the equipment and commander, and maybe go for gun lane drive vents and maybe some optics to help you spot for yourself. That's just my 2 cents on the idea, but both options are viable, and it's a pretty decent tank. I kind of hated it for the first few games because I was having bad games, like I just said. However, now I've played it a little bit more, I think it's actually quite a competitive tier 7 heavy tank. I don't like it as much as the Czech Tiger, which I will have a video coming out soon on that tank with that the Škoda, I think it's the tier 6 Škoda's gun. For some reason I prefer that more. Maybe it's just the thing about the Tiger, but this is definitely a tank that will ricochet more shells than the Czech Tiger. It'll be more forgiving for most players, especially newer players, and it's a pretty solid tank. In this battle here, you're seeing how well it can do against tier 8 tanks. We're just using the autoloader to get sort of clips in where we can trade or where we know that we can safely reload. We're advancing from sort of rock to rock, trying to preserve our hit points, and if you can preserve your hit points in an autoloader, you know that you can take a shot and go in and finish a tank off later in the battle. With the single fire, you have to be more active, which can be a problem, or it can be a playstyle that certain players won't like. I feel like I kind of play both for the playstyles, but I just prefer to have that better DPM and gun handling. It allows me to be more efficient, but yeah, this is definitely a viable alternative, and it's not the worst autoloader that I've seen in the game. It's pretty good. So in this game on Heilbronn, you've seen that I've picked up 1739 direct damage, I've blocked 135 damage, and I've got 858 assistance, and I'm just picking my moments with this autoloader. I'm getting shots in on higher tiered tanks, which means I'm going to be getting more XP, and if I don't fire too much heat, then I'll be making a fairly decent profit. So this game in particular is it's a little bit more of a drawn out game. I think that sometimes tends to happen here in Heilbronn. A lot of tanks like to camp in that northern part of the map where you see I'm sort of pointing my gun at now, in that sort of B6, B5, 6, 7 location, and I'm just trying to poke around this corner, see if I can spot out anything on the hill. And that's one problem that this tank has. It is spotting for itself. It's a really good support tank, and it's really good on city maps, but in open maps you do need to have people to spot for you, especially in higher tiered matches, and especially if you use the mobility setup that I have going on here with the Škoda T45. So I'm just staying behind this rock as I reload. You're going to want to fire your clip, but always be mindful when you're using the auto-loading package that you want to have hard cover to reload under, or you want to be able to escape and not have tanks chase after you. It's always a good thing to try and act like you're loaded at all times, and don't make it obvious to the enemy that you are loaded, because they might get to know this tank has an autoloader, get to know you're using the autoloader, and they'll come after you. And yeah, that can be a massive downfall of this tank, because some tanks have insane DPM, tiers 7, 8 and 9, and they will come and take you out pretty easily. In terms of the penetration, I found that the standard penetration is pretty good. It's better than the Czech Tiger. The 250mm of heat penetration is fantastic. It does suffer from that problem of the shell velocity, so you do have to bear that in mind when you're shooting at mid to long ranges. However, up close, the heat can be really useful when you're coming up against super heavies or just heavies in general. See here, I'm driving away. I'm trying to get some height to see if I can get some shots in on the TDs that are there camping in the C0 location. However, they're behind a ridgeline, so I'm going to have to go all the way back. But you'll see here that the mobility equipment that I'm using on this tank does mean that I can get around the map pretty well, actually, and it means that you can get that extra clip in or that extra shot of damage if you're using the single fire gun. So it's just these two tank destroyers left, and I'm hoping that I can get just a little bit more damage, but we do have a full health super heavy here on our team. But this Stridsvagn S1 is coming out in front of us. The armour means that we're going to struggle to penetrate, or be pretty much impossible with an 88mm to penetrate that tank from the front unless I'm firing heat. But we managed to get a ram in, and also our last shell in on that M56 Scorpion, meaning we get a kill at the end of the battle, or 2 kills I should say. So we actually pick up 7 kills in that game with a kamikaze medal, 2.7k direct damage, 858 assistance, 135 blocked, 66,000 silver profit, and an all-round decent game. And we're going to head on now into the 4th and final replay of today's video. So we're back on Heilbronn for the 4th and final replay of today's video. Unfortunately, I had to have another map to bring you, but that's just the way the map rotation was for me in my play session in this tank. For some reason I kept getting this map, so obviously it must want me to play it for some reason. But having said that, I don't mind this map, and I was having some pretty good games, and this is another tier 8 battle, so you can see once again how you can perform with the autoloader against tier 8. So we're going to head up here to the centre of the map here in the sort of F5 location. We're going to try and spot out any tanks that are trying to combat this little middle ridge here. There is this wheeled light vehicle, and then I see this Ragnarok, but we're going to try and side scrape this Ragnarok here, and we managed to do so, blocking a shell there, and we get one shell into him, try and fire a shell into the captured King Tiger. Fortunately we bounce, but we're going to probably need heat to go through the captured King Tiger, and especially at that angle. But we have this little alcove here to reload in, and I'm just hoping that my team push up behind me and that the enemies don't push up too far to that ridge line, because they will have shots into me and I will have to escape. So now I'm going to be coming out at a sort of 45-degree angle, angling downwards on this slope, and the reason I'm doing that is sort of twofold. One, to try and bounce off my upper plate. It will be slightly weaker when I'm reversing up the slope. They will be able to go through my upper hull, the tier 8s anyway, but I also want to try and get out of dodge, like now, if I feel like the enemies do have the upper hand and they're going to try and rush me. So we managed to pick up 886 damage in that engagement there. We block 800, which just goes to show that the armour is actually quite useful in a few different scenarios, and we get a little bit of assistance at 418 assistance. You're seeing here I loaded heat for the tier 8s, and just how slow that shell velocity is, really annoying there. We get a shot into the AMX M445, but he gets a shot into us. But it's not too bad of a trade. We've still got 915 hit points, and I'm loading back the AP. I try not to load too much heat, mainly for the shell velocity. The silver cost to me isn't too much of an issue, but the AP and that shell velocity makes it much easier to hit targets in mid to long ranges, and it's an absolutely fine value at 194mm of penetration on your AP. That's more than adequate for most battles that you'll find yourself in, especially when you are top tier, and this thing is an absolute beast in certain situations, especially if people don't know where to aim yet. Of course, not everyone will have bought the season pass, the ultimate season pass. They won't have this tank, and a few of the newer players might not know about the sort of armour layout of this tank, so you can take advantage of that right now if you so wish. But we get a shot there into the side of the captured King Tiger. I'm a little bit wary about pushing too far around this corner. I know a lot of tank destroyers like to camp in that northern spot that I mentioned in the previous gameplay. So we're just going to play it safe for the moment, conserve our 915 hit points, and try and get some shells in where we can. We block 2 shells there from tanks that have flanked around the west, so we've dropped down off that ridgeline, and we're going to try and poke over now and get a couple of shots, maybe a whole magazine into the back of this T29. We get all 3 rounds in there, and you can see that it's actually a relatively devastating clip, 660 alpha damage, especially when you're firing at sort of your own tier or lower tiers. You can take out lower tiers with a single magazine, and you can completely decimate a tier 7, leaving them on a one shot. Yeah, you even take a substantial amount of damage away from tiers 8s and 9s. 220 alpha damage, it's low. It is quite low for a tier 7 heavy tank, and that's the main reason I kind of first started playing with the autoloader. But when you do sort of get to grips with the single fire and you play it a little bit, and you do boost that up with the combat rations, it's a respectable reload of 6 seconds for 220 alpha damage, and it just means you've got to be a little bit more active in the game. So just to reiterate, as we come to the end of this game here, it's gone well for us in this game. you want to try and choose the best gun package to suit your kind of playstyle and your experience in the game. So if you're an experienced player, you like to be active in the battle, then I would definitely highly recommend you take the mobility commander and equipment and use the single fire for the DPM and gun handling. However, if you are a bit more of a passive player, maybe a newer player or someone that likes to support the heavies and they want to trade, I would go for the autoloader. It might suit you better, and that's just my opinion. And yeah, you'll see here that the traverse can be a little bit frustrating on this tank. However, if you do turn your hull and your turret at the same time, you are able to get shots in like we did there on that Lynx 6x6. And that brings to an end the 4th replay of today's review of the Lioness Škoda T45, at least I think it's the T45, yeah it is. We finish with a first class again. I haven't got the mastery badge yet, with 1612 base experience points, 2.8k direct damage, and 1548 assistance, blocking 1520 damage in that game, just showing you how well the armor can work out for you, with a nice profit of 51,000 silver. So that's it for today's review of the Škoda T45. I hope you found it useful. I hope you're all going to have a fantastic weekend, and until next time, I'll see you on the battlefield, and bye for now.